Hello guys and welcome. In this video tutorial I'll explain by words through making a video on how to create a simple Gravity Forms front-end login user panel, which you will require a little knowledge of programming. So I've prepared this long and probably hard to read tutorial, which I will explain right now in detail on how to go through. So let's say you have a Gravity Forms, but you haven't got the login or registration add-on, or you want to learn Gravity Forms, right? So the first thing you have to do is you have to go to the documentation of the Gravity Forms and you have to go through the hooks. Our two hooks that we're interested in are Gravity Form GForm after submission hook, which fires after we press the submit button and the form has been validated. And the another one is called GForm validation hook, which we'll look up in a minute. So here it is. We'll use those two hooks to log in our user upon filling in the form that we have created. So if you are logged in, go to the forms. Those forms are denoted by the Gravity Forms icon. And then click on the forms, seek your form. In my case, it's called Login Register Form. And drag and drop two fields from the right to left. One will be called username, and the other one will be called password. When you click on the form, you'll see that the form has an ID associated with it. We'll need that later on in our tutorial, so bear in mind what's the ID of that form. Also, make sure that this form is set as required. You'll find it under Rules. Then under Appearance tab, you'll find Custom CSS class. Make sure you set it to username. You'll have to do the same with the password field. Make sure that the class is set to password. Make sure that it's required. Remember the ID. And also under advanced, make sure that you check the enable password input. This is important because thanks to that we'll be able to hide our input so that no one from behind our back will be able to see what's the password. Then once you are done and you are set up with your form, you'll have to do some coding. My personal suggestion is to use a child theme or a plugin where you'll be able to paste that code yourself. So if you're working with a child theme, you can open up functions.php of your file of your theme, and then you have to simply paste that snippet of code. Now then, notice that part. It corresponds to the ID of your form, and our form ID is number 10. So this hook won't fire in our case. However, in your case, it will be probably a different ID. So remember that this ID corresponds to that ID, so you have to change that. Then you got username and pass. In our case, it was ID of 1 and ID of 3, right? So it won't match as well. But it's not a problem because you can do it yourself. It's pretty simple, right? Then with our username and pass, we can try login in our user, and we'll simply log him in. So this will happen after our form was submitted. What we want to do in between is to make sure that our form was validated. And by validation, we mean that we check if that specific combination of username and password exists in our database. What we have to do is to figure out if those two fields have the proper value. And this is where our class comes in handy. You remember we've assigned a username to one of the form fields. Then we get that user by login, which login corresponds to the username. We pass a value to that user, and then if that user is empty, which means that he doesn't exist in our database, we return a message that the invalid username was provided. We'll do the same for the password field. So if user doesn't exist or the password is incorrect for that given user, we'll invalidate the form as such, right? So in my case, I provided invalid password. Bear in mind that I used a global user variable, which has to be done as such because the validation goes one by one. So we have a separate validation for field number 1 and we have a separate validation for field number 2, which means that those two don't happen concurrently. They happen one after another. It's like this function was called twice and you don't know it because it happens behind the scenes, right? Now then, if you set up your form with proper credentials, you will be logged in. And this particular section of my tutorial explains why. Then again, if you want to expand your knowledge about the Gravity Forms hooks and registration editing account, there are tutorials part 2 and part 3 which cover those topics later on in the future. I hope you guys enjoyed this short tutorial. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below. I'll be able to help you out. This is pretty simple.